China went from being a very poor country to a quite developed country in 40 years, and for 1.4 billion people. So this is the biggest single change in the world economy in a very, very long time. And it is the first time, well, Japan was the only case for a long time of an Asian country that achieved even industrialization. But this is something different. Now, East Asia is a powerhouse economically, and China is, of course, with nearly 20% of the world population, and with an economy that is, depending on measurements in purchasing power terms, bigger than the US in absolute size, and in market prices, smaller than the US, but in either event, a major economy. This is something new in the world. It's a good thing overall for the world, because China went from poverty to development, and China in 2,000 years has played a major role in world civilization, and I'm glad to see China back on its feet. The reason China was so poor is part of this story. They call it the century of humiliation. China made one terrible mistake, the worst economic mistake of any country in all of world history that I know of. And that was in 1433, so 600 years ago, they stopped their naval fleet, and they became an inward-looking country. And then 350 years after that, suddenly Great Britain started knocking on the door, and China realized we're behind. And then in 1839, Britain launched the war for the freedom to export opium to China. Mind-boggling. So the Opium Wars are the Opium Wars for a reason, which is gangsterism, which was a large part of the British Empire. And from 1839 to 1949, it was complete disaster for China. 2 opium wars, the Taiping Rebellion, the Boxer Rebellion, Civil War, Japanese invasion, Civil War. So by 1949, China was completely impoverished from having been a world civilization for 2 millennia, impoverished. China then, without a long story, the first decades were complicated, but starting in 1978, probably the greatest economic reform in history of scale took hold under Deng Xiaoping with the opening of China. And in 4 decades, China went from impoverishment to a highly innovative, dynamic economy. The big problem, in quotation marks, from the US point of view, is they became powerful, but not under our supervision. The Americans have the audacity to say, we believed that they would become a liberal democracy like us if they developed, but that failed, so now we have to confront them. That's the American mindset. It's a little ignorant, because China's statecraft, centralized state, is not about the People's Republic of China or the Communist Party of China. It started in 221 BC. Centralized state. It started with the Han Empire. So this is a long story. Americans don't care, don't understand it. Now, your question is, what does it mean for China and the world? If we have peace, which I'm counting on because I can't imagine the alternative, I hope and look forward to China being a highly prosperous, dynamic, outward-looking country that is a pillar of the international system. I would like Europe and China to have good relations and to deal with each other. China will not be a democracy in the form of European parliamentary democracy. It will have its own statecraft. There will be imperfections like there are anywhere. It's not our business other than to have good discussion about different options and so forth, but we should have good relations with China. We should work together. We should analyze common problems. We should say, you have wisdom of 2,000 years. What would Confucius say about this? What would deep Chinese values say about this? It sounds silly, but I think it's a very serious point. I'm hosting a meeting in Athens of Confucian and Aristotelian scholars because I want to know what both those philosophers, what their philosophies can add to our modern problem solving. I actually believe a lot because they teach us about order, virtue, basic human nature questions. So my view is engage with this remarkable civilization, be thankful that it has escaped from poverty, that it is innovating. I'm grateful, for example, that Chinese scientists developed the most effective treatment for malaria that we have, from an ancient Chinese herbal treatment from Qinghua So, which we use the extract artemisinin, which is saving millions of lives every year in Africa and Southeast Asia because of what a Nobel laureate Chinese scientist developed of an ancient practice. Well, there's a lot of that that can come. I was delighted, I mentioned yesterday, that downstairs nearby on Gran Via, there's the Huawei building. Okay, I went to Huawei, my wife and I visited Huawei a couple of times. We went in 2019, incredibly impressive. So impressive that the United States insisted on shutting them down. Why? Because they got better at 5G than any US company, that's why. And then the US said, well, they can spy on us. That's not the real answer. The real answer is if it's an American equipment, then the US can spy on me. If it's Huawei equipment, it's a lot harder for the US to spy on me. So the fact of the matter is the US just tried to shut down Huawei because they made beautiful, low-cost 5G systems for developing countries that were going to sweep the world. And so the US had to go threaten everybody. Don't do business with them. So this is the first Huawei store that I've seen in a long time. You wouldn't find anyone in the United States. But the point I'm making is let us engage constructively. And China has a huge amount to offer for the world. And if we engage, it's not going to take over the world. And by the way, aside from many other reasons why China's not going to take over the world, China's population is going to fall by about 400 million people in the next 80 years. China's going to become old. I kind of appreciate that these days more than I would have before. But I also really feel old people don't want to take over the world. They just want quiet, you know? We want peace. We want nice. And that, I think, is what China will want as well.